Hello, my name is Azeneth and I am in the ninth semester of the English language major. In this video, I will give you an overview of the thesis research proposal I've been developing through the course of Seminario de Titulación. My proposal's title is Attitudes and Practices of the English Language Teachers Towards the Use of the L1 Translanguaging in the EFL Classrooms at the University of Quintana. According to Nagy, in the past it was believed that the right path to teach English was adopting a monolingual approach, which assumed that only the target language could be used in instruction without providing any chance for the translation between the target language and the L1 or using the student's L1 as a course inside the classroom. Nowadays, it has become necessary to adopt new approaches to teaching, which consider the diversity of the classroom with respect to the background of the students, their different linguistic skills and competences. One relatively new approach to English teaching is translanguaging. According to Kanagarak, translanguaging is the ability of multilingual speakers to shuttle between languages, treating the diverse languages that form the repertoire as an integrated system. Similarly, Williams claims that translanguaging in education refers to the use of one language in order to reinforce the other, in order to increase understanding, and in order to augment the pupil's activity in both languages. Garcia and Way hold that translanguaging refers to both complex language practices of plurilingual individuals and communities, as well as the pedagogical approaches that use those complex practices. So as you can see, the terminology used to describe translanguaging is diverse and it varies from one author to another. However, all of them converge in one point. They all are related to the use of both the language learner's L1 and all the language being part of their repertoire and the target language in the process of language acquisition. For the purposes of this study, and in order to provide a clear understanding of what translanguaging is about, I will use the term translanguaging to make allusion to this practice, being the L1 Spanish and the target language English. The use of translanguaging in the context of the EFL classroom is still debatable, and teachers' perspective and attitudes about whether using it or not vary, assuming different positions. These attitudes and perspectives become important since they are the ones that shape teachers' pedagogical practices and classroom language. Unfortunately, even though translanguaging benefits and its pedagogical value have been subject of study of many researches, research on the attitudes of instructors towards translanguaging is scarce, especially in higher education contexts. And looking at our immediate context, more specifically at the University of Quintana Roo, it is evident the lack of research on this respect. For these reasons, the aim of this research is to identify and describe the attitudes and practices of English teachers towards the use of the L1 Spanish in the EFL classrooms of the University of Quintana Roo. As it was previously mentioned, using L1 in foreign language teaching has been debated between scholars who adopt two major opposing approaches. The first approach, monolingual approach, holds that the target language should be the only medium of instruction. It draws on the theories of universal grammar of Chomsky, the separate underlying proficiency, and the two solitudes model of Cummings. The universal grammar regards language competence as innate, monolingual, and arising from an homogeneous environment. Separate underlying proficiency and the two solitudes model treats languages separately and assumes that there is no connection and no transfer between first and second languages. They also suggest that proficiency in second language is only achieved through instruction in and exposure to that language. And the L1 is regarded of less value, so it shouldn't be used for instruction. The second approach, in contrast, embraces the use of the first language as innate. Translanguaging scholars have evoked Vivian Coates' notion of multi-competence to combat all the monolingual assumptions already mentioned. This notion claims that multilinguals parallel process the diverse languages in their repertoire even when they function in a relatively homogeneous language. The translanguaging approach also draws on the common underlying proficiency theory of Cummins, which postulates that in terms of cognitive functions, languages work interdependently, which means knowledge of the first language influences the acquisition of the second language. This model places first language and second language side by side and offers that resorting to the first language contributes to the development of the second. Translanguaging is also considered as a theory in pedagogy. From this perspective, language teaching is seen as a dynamic process that engages students' multiple meaning-making resources, in which the educator's role is to engage in complex discursive practice that include all the language practices of students in order to develop new practices and sustain the old ones. It also involves instructors helping their learners to become more aware of their entire linguistic repertoire and how to use the various features of their repertoire for different situations, purposes, and tasks. Carroll and Samlin said that the studies that do investigate instructors' attitudes have found that they often experience tensions related to how often, when, where, and why they should use translanguaging in the classrooms. Also, other studies have shown that while some instructors may recognize the value of translanguaging, they usually believe that it should be targeted to specific tasks, situations, and proficiency levels. Nambi-san examined the attitudes and practices of English language teachers towards translanguaging in Iowa and found that the majority of the participants did not implement translanguaging practices in their classrooms, although they believe in the importance of them. In another study, Macmillan and Rivers examined the attitudes of native English speakers of translanguaging at a Japanese university. They found that these teachers had positive attitudes about the selective use of the L1 in English classes, contrary to institutional policy. In this study, two research questions have been formulated. What are the attitudes of the English language teachers across the different educational programs at bachelor level towards the use of the L1 in the EFL classrooms at the University of Quintana Roo? How are the practices of the English language teachers across the different educational programs at bachelor level in relation to their attitudes towards the use of the L1 in the EFL classrooms at the University of Quintana Roo? Regarding the nature of these research questions, this study will use a combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches. Therefore, it can be considered as to have a mixed methods design. It will take place at the University of Quintana Roo, Chetumal campus, and it will be carried out in two phases. During the first one, 30 English language teachers of the Language Learning Center will be chosen by means of a purposive sampling in order to be surveyed. These participants will be included in the study regarding the fact that they teach English as a general core course in the first, second, and third and fourth semesters of the different bachelor programs offered by the university, which at the same time correspond to the English levels of introductory, basic, intermediate, and pre-intermediate. Subsequently, the second phase will take 4 participants of the first phase to observe some of their classes. The participants will be selected using a non-probability convenience sampling, since the classroom observations will highly depend on the willingness and the openness of the participants to be observed during their teaching practice. For the purposes of this research, two instruments to collect data will be used: an online questionnaire and classroom observations. This questionnaire will be an adapted version of a questionnaire created by Nambisan. It will be applied through Google Forms, and it will encompass a total of 18 items, aiming at gathering information about teachers' general information and teachers' opinions and perceptions about the use of Spanish in the classroom, the importance that they place on it, and the frequency with which it is used in their classroom. The questionnaire items will be presented in closed-ended format and Likert type scale. Additionally, it will include 4 open-ended questions. The second instrument to collect data will be natural and non-participative classroom observations, which will be carried out during the second phase of the study in order to depth in the practices of the English language teachers in relation to the use of Spanish inside the classroom. In this study, the researcher will rely on both qualitative and quantitative data analysis. For the analysis of the data obtained from the questionnaire Likert type items, the researcher will use descriptive statistics to calculate the percentages of each of them. In case of the open-ended questions, the researcher will possibly use the scores analysis, taking as basis the appraisal framework for evaluation of the scores. This framework will be used as reference to see which words of the participants' responses could indicate a positive or negative attitude towards translanguaging. Finally, to analyze the qualitative data resulting from the classroom observations, transcriptions, and structural coding will be used. The benefit expected from this research is firstly to contribute to fill the gap existing in research about this topic, more specifically in the context of the University of Quintana Roo. It is expected that the results serve as a basis to acknowledge and dismantle the myth behind the use of the L1 in the foreign language classroom, from which in the future new perspectives and approaches to English teaching could be built up or adopted in the EFL classrooms of the University of Quintana Roo.